Hello, my name is Lucy Estel, and I'm the manager of the Child Protection Branch in the Division of Protection and Permanency, which is within the Department for Community-Based Services. You may have heard of it referred to as DCBS. Today we're going to talk about how to recognize and report child abuse and neglect. There will be a post-training assessment to test for your basic knowledge of the training components. So let's get started. The Child Abuse Prevention and Treatment Act states that in order to remain eligible for federal funding, states are required to have procedures for the reporting and investigation of abuse and neglect. Kentucky state law is listed in Kentucky Revised Statute, or KRS. It states that anyone with a reasonable suspicion of child abuse, neglect, and dependency is required to make a report to the Cabinet. Failure to report could result in criminal charges. Mandatory reporters include peace officers, coroners, medical examiners, school personnel, child caring personnel, dentists, health professionals, mental health professionals, social workers, or any individuals from any other organization. The only cited exceptions are for the attorney-client privilege or the clergy penitent. There is a legal protection in KRS for reporting sources. It states that anyone acting upon reasonable cause to make a report has good faith immunity from liability, civil, or criminal charges. This also covers if court action results from the report. Regarding confidentiality, KRS states that the reporting source's identity cannot be disclosed to anyone except law enforcement, members of multidisciplinary teams, or under a court order. Let's talk about what precipitates knowledge of maltreatment. A victim or other individual may disclose an occurrence of maltreatment. You should listen attentively, but do not overreact. Do not attempt to interview the individual yourself or conduct your own investigation. KRS states that other persons do not have the authority to conduct internal investigations. Unauthorized investigations may compromise a criminal proceeding, impede a criminal investigation, or create a liability for the person investigating on their own. If you hear a disclosure, witness an incident of maltreatment, or if you receive the information secondhand, at that moment you become obligated under state law to make a report. So how should you make a report of abuse or neglect? DCBS has 9 regional centralized intake units that take reports of suspected abuse and neglect during regular business hours, or you may report via the internet at the link on your screen. This information is also located on the Cabinet's website. If you need to report abuse or neglect after regular business hours, you may contact the statewide abuse hotline. Here is a list of the 9 regional centralized intake teams, including the counties they serve. I encourage you to print this slide and keep it for your reference, although the information is posted on our website, and the web address is listed at the conclusion of the training. You will see that the Eastern Mountain Service Region covers the eastern part of the state, specifically Pike County and surrounding areas. Jefferson County covers Jefferson County only. Northeastern Service Region covers the northeastern part of the state, specifically Moorhead and surrounding areas. Northern Bluegrass is the northern Kentucky area. Salt River Trail covers the counties surrounding Jefferson and extending to Fayette. And Southern Bluegrass covers Fayette and surrounding counties. The Cumberlands covers the southeastern part of the state. The Lakes is far western Kentucky. And Two Rivers covers the Bowling Green area and surrounding counties. What information do you need to provide when making a report? Report only what you see or hear. Do not try to interpret or paraphrase the child's statement. Do not add to or take away parts of the disclosure you feel may not be important. Provide objective information and as much information as you can about the family, such as the contact information, last known address, or where the child attends school. The point of making the report to DCBS is not to make a decision about whether or not you need to call. If you see or hear something, you can ask follow-up questions as long as you don't initiate an investigation on your own, as we discussed a few slides ago. Even if a child does not disclose abuse or neglect, but you have a suspicion, the report needs to be made. Questions that will be asked when making a report to DCBS include: what is your name and relationship to the child? Specific information about what happened. What is the current location of the child, and what is the current condition of the child? Do you have any knowledge of previous child abuse or neglect issues? Regarding immediate safety issues, if there are weapons, vicious dogs, active meth lab, or other safety hazards, please include that information in your report. And what information do you have regarding the perpetrator? Keep in mind, while the reporting source does not have to provide their information, it is very helpful for the investigator in the event follow-up is needed. Remember, the reporting source's identity will not be disclosed to the family, with the exceptions we discussed a few slides ago. So what happens next? After DCBS receives the report of suspected abuse or neglect, the intake worker screens the information provided by the reporting source. The 5 screening options are: meets acceptance criteria, an investigator will be assigned, does not meet acceptance criteria, an investigator will not be assigned, and no further action will be taken by DCBS. Resource link: the report does not meet acceptance criteria, but the intake worker links the reporting source to a community resource, such as community action, a medical provider, the court, or a counselor. Insufficient information: there is not sufficient information provided to properly screen the report. Or law enforcement assist means that the report does not meet the cabinet's acceptance criteria, but the report is referred to law enforcement, and an investigative social worker will assist law enforcement with their investigation. The Cabinet's acceptance criteria are based on the statutory definition of abuse, neglect, or dependency. The Cabinet does not have the statutory authority to investigate allegations that are not related to identifiable safety issues. These are the basic definitions of abuse, neglect, and dependency. Physical abuse is non-accidental physical injury. Sexual abuse or exploitation is the use of the child for purposes of sexual stimulation, use of the child to engage in acts of prostitution, obscene, or pornographic material. Neglect is the failure to provide essential protection, care, supervision, food, clothing, shelter, education, or medical care necessary for the child's health and safety. And we do consider the child's age with these types of reports. Dependency is the child is without essential protection or care, not due to abuse or neglect. Human trafficking is when the child is subjected to engage in sexual acts or labor services in exchange for something of value, such as drugs, money, or shelter. Please note that human trafficking allegations are also investigated when the alleged perpetrator is not in a caretaking role of the child. There are several different categories of neglect and considerations when accepting a report related to these programs. For example, supervision neglect is investigated depending on the age of the child, and we do consider chronological and developmental age, the length of the time the child is unsupervised, maturity of the child, availability of other adults, and safety hazards present in the home. Environmental neglect is considered if there is a serious health and safety hazard. This might include hazardous materials or chemicals, raw sewage, insufficient shelter, a fire safety hazard, or infestations of vermin or rodents. The important component of medical neglect is considering that the untreated injury, illness, condition, or disability may interfere with normal functioning, become life-threatening, or result in permanent impairment. Risk of harm indicates that there are incapacitated caretakers, repeated exposure to domestic violence, or exposure to a sexual offender. Continuing with neglect. Educational neglect. The age of the child is considered, along with the school's exhaustion of all resources. Caretaker neglect prevents the child from attending or performing in school. Substance use or abuse. The caretaker is under the influence while caring for or driving their child, or their use has affected their ability to parent. Food neglect. Dietary needs are not met, or their health is impacted due to malnutrition, dehydration, or going without food for a period of time. Hygiene and clothing. Child's physical health is affected by the caretaker's act or omission of care. An emotional injury is inflicted harm on the child's emotional well-being by non-accidental means, and this often requires a qualified mental health professional assessment. Why doesn't DCBS accept certain reports? Reports are not accepted when the situation does not meet the definition of abuse, neglect, or dependency, or if the injury is a result of an accident. Remember, DCBS does not have statutory authority to investigate accidental injuries. Examples of reports that do not meet criteria may include: the reporting source has generalized feelings of concern regarding the welfare of the child, but no specific allegations indicate child abuse, neglect, or dependency. The report alleges corporal punishment appropriate to the age of the child without marks or injuries. Or the report concerns child abuse inflicted by a person who is not in a caretaking role, except in cases of human trafficking. State law prohibits the Cabinet for Health and Family Services from disclosing any confidential information about a case to anyone except custodial parents, alleged perpetrators, court personnel, law enforcement, and specific professional providers, including school personnel, with a legitimate interest in the case. So what happens next? If a report is accepted for investigation, social workers have required timeframes stated in Kentucky Administrative Regulation in which they have to make face-to-face contact with the victim. If the report alleges imminent safety risks, such as sexual abuse, human trafficking, serious physical abuse, or neglect, the initiation timeframe is 1 hour. If the report alleges non-imminent risk, the initiation timeframe is 24 hours. If the report alleges a low-risk incident, the worker has 48 hours to initiate the report. These timeframes include weekends and holidays. After the worker initiates the report, there are several steps to complete an investigation and risk assessment. The first step is assessment. During this phase, the worker conducts interviews, observations of family members and their interactions, speaks with collaterals and takes photographs if needed. The worker collects records such as medical or mental health or school records. There may be a forensic interview needed depending on the allegations, and the worker makes referrals to service providers in order to support and stabilize the family. The worker assesses the risks identified, which may include a substance abuse assessment. The next step is consultation. During this phase, the worker consults with their supervisor and regional management. If the report requires court action, the worker will staff the case with the county attorney. The final step is results and findings. During this phase, the worker and supervisor will make a determination of findings based on the incident and risks identified during the assessment. They will then decide if the safety and risk factors require the case to be opened or if the case may be closed. It is possible that court action and removal of the child may be needed. If this occurs, a case planning meeting will occur with the family and service providers. Upon approval of the assessment, the worker will send a notification of findings letter to the family. If the report is substantiated, the family has the right to appeal the findings through an administrative hearing. Investigators have 30 working days to complete an investigation, but may request additional time if needed. Things that may warrant an extension to completing the investigation are delays related to law enforcement, placement of the child, obtaining external documentation, on-site interviews from outside the county, region, or state, or the worker's inability to locate the family. There are 3 different findings the investigator can make at the conclusion of the assessment. Unsubstantiated means that sufficient evidence, indicators, or justification does not exist for the substantiation of abuse, neglect, or dependency. If an investigation is unsubstantiated, the case will be closed. In need of services finding is regarding the overall assessment indicating low to moderate risk of maltreatment. If the issue or concern identified falls below the level that indicates a protection case needs to be opened, or the parent is refusing services from the cabinet, or it's determined to be a low-risk case, the case may be closed and an aftercare plan developed with the family that links them to resources to prevent the reoccurrence of maltreatment. Substantiated is the case is moderate to high risk, the issues necessitate removal of the child, or court activity is necessary to ensure the family's cooperation. A child protection case may be opened, and different types of cases include an in-home case in which the child remains in the family home, an out-of-home care case in which the child is removed from the family home and placed with an approved relative or foster care, or a status case when the child has status court offenses that might relate to truancy or beyond parental control. If a case is open, there is a shift from the investigative role to assisting the family in parenting the children safely. DCBS will provide reasonable efforts by outlining services during the case planning conference. If court is needed, then the family's case plan also becomes part of the court orders in the case. The worker will make at least monthly home visits to the family and child. Workers will also maintain contact with service providers involved with the family, and the worker will initiate service referrals to assist the family. There are 2 types of court action the worker may initiate. Emergency custody orders are utilized if the child is at immediate risk. A worker staffs the emergency removal with their supervisor and regional management. Petitions are filed and emergency custody is requested. If emergency custody is granted by the judge, the child is placed with an approved relative or in foster care. Within 72 hours of an emergency custody order, a temporary removal hearing is held. There are 2 exceptions in which outside agencies can take protective custody of a child. Law enforcement can remove a child up to 12 hours without a court order, and physicians and hospital administrators can place a child on a 72-hour hold without a court order. Non-removal petitions may be initiated by the worker if the identified risks are not an immediate safety threat to the child. The worker again staffs the case with the supervisor and files a petition to make the case court active. This allows the case plan to become part of the court order, and that may assist with compliance. Clients will be appointed a legal representative if they cannot afford one, and children are appointed a guardian ad litem to represent their best interests in court. It is possible that you could be called as a witness in court depending on your observation of the family or the incident. If you are subpoenaed to appear in court, contact the issuing attorney to discuss preparation for your testimony. You will need to be prepared with relevant and reliable information. Testify truthfully in a clear manner. Do not elaborate. If you are unsure, ask for the question to be clarified, and answer directly to the attorney or judge. Here are some additional resources to assist you in making a report of abuse or neglect. Now we will discuss how to recognize child physical, sexual, and emotional abuse, as well as neglect. Remember, if you are suspicious of abuse or neglect, report it. Even if the child does not make a disclosure, or if the child's explanation does not coincide with your observation. The following slides provide information as to what might be a trigger for you to make a report. With each category of abuse and neglect, there are physical, behavioral, and caregiver indicators. Regarding physical abuse, physical indicators might include suspicious bruises, burns, bites, broken bones, or black eyes. Patterned injuries such as a hand or a belt. Observation of a child being punched, hit, or kicked, even if there are no current observable injuries. Or an altercation between the child and caretaker. Behavioral indicators could include the child being fearful of the caretaker, child shies away from touch, report of pain, wears unnecessary clothing to cover up, such as long sleeves and long pants during warm months, or the child is violent toward others or animals, or withdrawn. Some caregiver indicators include no explanation or a vague explanation as to how the injury occurred. They may be aggressive toward others, blame the child's sibling or others, or they may delay seeking treatment for injury. Remember, DCBS does not have the statutory authority to investigate without an identifiable safety issue. Here are some helpful tips for accidental versus potentially suspicious injury. Common places on the body for accidental injuries are shins, lower arms, underneath the chin, forehead, hips, elbows, ankles, bony prominences. And common places on the body for suspicious injuries are upper arms, anterior thigh, trunk, genitalia, buttocks, face, ears, or neck. Remember that inflicted bruises often have characteristic location, patterns, or shapes that can help differentiate them from accidental injuries. Physical indicators of sexual abuse and exploitation include that the child may have trouble sitting or standing, or have stained, bloody, or torn underclothes. There may be blood in the urine or feces. A young child might have a sexually transmitted disease or pregnancy, or there is unusual itching or pain in the genital or anal area. Behavioral indicators include sophisticated, age-inappropriate sexual knowledge, incontinence or soiling, fear of the perpetrator or certain places, such as the bedroom, bathroom, a specific vehicle. Other children may exhibit self-harm, older children may exhibit self-harm, eating disorders, running away, or substance abuse. Some caregiver indicators: unusually protective or controlling of the child, jealous of the child's relationship with peers or other adults, may favor the child over siblings, demonstrates what appears to be sexual affection or with sexual overtones. Exploitation or human trafficking indicators are, and with human trafficking this could involve sexual trafficking or forced labor trafficking. Unexplained truancy, or the child is not enrolled in school. There are multiple runaway incidents, references to frequent travel to other places. Tattoos or branding are common occurrences with human trafficking victims. The child may be inappropriately dressed or dressed provocatively. There's a sudden change in the attire or possession, such as expensive jewelry. There's a boyfriend who is noticeably older, or the child may have multiple cell phones. Also, the child may have multiple forms of ID or fake ID, access to one or more hotel key cards. They may move frequently either in the state or out of the state. They don't know what city, state, or community they're currently in, or there may be inconsistencies in their story. Emotional injury, physical indicators are bedwetting or soiling, frequent psychosomatic complaints such as headache, nausea, abdominal pain. The child has not attained significant developmental milestones. Behavioral indicators include desperately seeking affection, loss of self-confidence or self-esteem, socially withdrawn or a loss of interest, decrease in school performance or loss of interest, or depression. Caregiver indicators might include unusually harsh or critical of the child, calls the child names or belittles the child, unrealistic expectations, or involves the child in adult situations or attempts to sabotage the child's relationship with another caretaker. Physical indicators of neglect include consistently dressed inappropriately for the weather, or they may have ill-fitting or dirty clothes or shoes, consistently bad hygiene, malnourished, they do not receive medical care for problems after the caretaker has been made aware, they're unsupervised or alone for an unacceptable amount of time, or they're consistently tired or sleepy. Some behavioral indicators include poor school performance or attendance, poor social skills, overly compliant, passive, or withdrawn, or they may take food or money without permission. Caregiver indicators of neglect are the failure to provide for the child's basic needs or care, leaves the child home alone or unsupervised, or puts their own needs before the child's needs. Remember, if you are suspicious of abuse or neglect, report it. If you have any further questions about how to recognize or report child physical, sexual, emotional abuse, or neglect, you may contact the Child Protection Branch at the phone number or email on your screen, or you may visit our website. Thank you so much for joining us today. I hope you found this information helpful. Please feel free to contact our office if you have any additional questions or need additional information.